Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on, well, an art historical giant, someone whose work really defines a whole visual era. And we're going to try and figure out how he managed to, sneak his way past the museum guard and influence everything from your phone screen aesthetics to the way architects even think about light. We are diving deep into the sun-drenched, deceptively simple, and profoundly complex vision of David Hockney.
And this deep dive is so necessary because Hockney is one of those rare figures who successfully bridges these massive intellectual gaps. We're not just looking at a handful of famous paintings today. We're examining an entire visual philosophy that spans, well, the whole trajectory of modern art, from abstract expressionism to pop, through digital experiments, and right into the geometry of human perception.
It's a huge scope.
It is. This is about how Hockney trained the world piece by piece to see color and light differently, and why he just never stopped asking, what is this thing we call sight?
Okay, let's unpack this journey because the starting line is just pure drama. Our narrative ignition point is that auction shockwave that, it just reverberated through the art world not too long ago. I want you to set the scene for us, Christie's. The spotlights are blinding, but the real heat is coming from the bids.
The energy in that room is, it's almost electric. Think of it.
Yeah.
You have this packed auction house. Every major collector in the world, or at least their representative, is there. And the moment focuses on one canvas, vibrant and immediately recognizable. A specialist is on the stage, tapping a little silver hammer, and the bids are coming in, but not in small increments. They're leaping in these massive, almost aggressive jumps that signal intense desire and intense competition.
Wow. So the atmosphere must have been absolutely tense, escalating far beyond what anyone expected.
Oh, it did. And when that hammer finally falls and the painting sells for a record-breaking, just ridiculous sum for a living artist at the time, the sound of that single tap is felt globally. But the significance of that sale wasn't just the money.
Right. It was more than that.
It was a cultural pivot. It sort of cracked open a portal, inviting everyone, the collectors, the critics, and especially the incredibly curious public, to rewind the tape of Hockney's life and reconsider his entire contribution.
So it forced a reevaluation.
It confirmed definitively that art history isn't some boring museum hallway you rush through to get to the gift shop. It's a dramatic, ongoing, binge-worthy series full of brilliant chaos and surprising longevity. That single sale forced the art establishment to give him his full due.
That sets our mission perfectly. We need to trace that improbable journey. How did a blonde kid from Bradford, West Yorkshire, who was sketching in notebooks and using, cheap paints, go from relative obscurity to having works worth more than small countries' budgets? Our central question is, what were the intellectual and geographical forces that shaped his unique vision? And why does his world feel both mundane and, at the same time, utterly magical?
It's a study in controlled contradiction. And to understand the magic, you really have to start with the rebellion.
Okay, let's rewind to that origin story. The late 1950s, Hockney arrives at the Royal College of Art in London. He's carrying the distinct sound of Yorkshire in his accent, and yes, very cheap paint. And this is a moment of total upheaval in art history.
Total upheaval is right. Abstract expressionism is the reigning monarch, supposedly serious and high-minded. But pop art is rising quickly, bringing with it this challenge to what high art even means. The default academic attitude was that painting was either dead, dying, or just refusing to die fast enough. It was a very serious, very dour intellectual environment.
And Hockney's approach to this environment was just immediate refusal.
Exactly. He developed a powerful habit right away, ignoring everyone's expectations, especially those of his professors. He recognized that the abstract expressionist demand for deep philosophical angst just wasn't his style. He was having fun. He wanted to paint what he saw, what he felt, and what he wanted, which often meant bright, approachable, figurative work.
And this refusal led to that absolutely famous controversy with the exam committee and his diploma.
Yes. It's a great example of institutional bias clashing with intellectual honesty. The college famously hesitated to grant him his diploma because he was openly writing the word queer in his works, directly referencing his identity in the art. And this brings up a crucial design knowledge point about the rigid hierarchy in art schools then.
What was that hierarchy like?
Well, painting was serious, graphics or anything illustrative was commercial, and anything openly personal, especially about identity, was just deemed dangerous, or at least inappropriate for a degree show.
So they were trying to enforce this aesthetic purity based on some, outdated moral and stylistic judgments, and Hockney just refused to play along.
He refused a diploma on principle. He argued that if they were judging him on everything but his ability to paint, then the diploma was meaningless. He forced their hand, and they eventually relented. He was choosing the dangerous, personal, and honest path, knowing that the real education was the mental toolkit he was building.
And what were the key components of that toolkit?
Well, while he was in London, he was voraciously studying art history, but only to figure out how to break the rules effectively. His most significant influences were twofold. First, Picasso's restless reinvention. Picasso taught him that you don't stick to one signature style. You evolve, you change, you borrow, you break. And second, he absorbed Matisse's incredible color logic. The idea that color does not have to be tethered to reality. It can be pushed for emotional effect.
And you can see that uniquely British tradition of self-deprecating irony in his work too, especially in his early self-portraits with the slightly oversized, ever-growing glasses.
That irony is the necessary filter. It allows him to approach potentially serious subjects like personal identity or technical painting challenges with a lightness that invites the viewer in. He is serious about the work, but never about himself. What's truly fascinating in terms of his technique is that even the academic purists at the time were confused by it. They argued his merging of strong graphic outlines with painterly textured surfaces shouldn't work,
Why shouldn't it work? What was the problem?
because it visually contradicted the accepted rules of depth and rendering. Graphic outlines are typical of illustration. They flatten space. Painterly surfaces suggest texture, depth, serious intent. Mixing them felt like mixing oil and water conceptually. It was considered, well, aesthetically vulgar.
So even the choice of line itself was a statement.
Absolutely. And that's why there's still an ongoing critical debate today over those lines. Are they a direct, rebellious nod to commercial illustration, the lowbrow side of pop art, or are they a subconscious echo of the highbrow tradition, like Matisse's crisp cutouts? The consensus is that it's both. He took both traditions and used them to create something entirely new, demonstrating that great art often exists in the contradiction.
And like any great artist narrative, there has to be a geographical catalyst for change. In Hockney's case, it wasn't some intellectual or emotional crisis that propelled him across the Atlantic. It was just the weather.
Precisely. A particularly cold, gray English winter, the kind that makes you question all of your life choices.
So he hears the legends of California blue skies, blue pools, and lights so generous it feels almost impossible. He boards a plane, and the moment he steps off, the landscape doesn't just greet him. It assaults his senses in the most friendly way possible.
The sensory details were immediate and overwhelming. For someone who grew up in the muted, atmospheric light of Yorkshire, California was high definition. The palm trees lean like they've just settled into permanent leisure. The light is so intense that shadows are not soft graduations of gray. They are crisp architectural blocks of color. The flickering swimming pools look like jewels scattered across the suburban landscape. Everything appears simultaneously artificial in its perfection and hyper-real in its saturation.
He starts walking around Los Angeles, a landscape that is just fundamentally different from London.
It was a shock. He famously compared the initial feeling of LA to walking through a highly curated, almost artificial environment. You're captured by the artificial perfection, confused by the sprawling, repetitive layout, and slightly overwhelmed by the relentless cleanliness. The sunlight ricocheted off the glass and stucco surfaces with the aggressive confidence of a Hollywood agent who knows exactly what he's selling.
And this environment immediately inspires the works that would define his early celebrity, those famous pool paintings. But there's that strange, delightful irony that throws this fantastic philosophical layer over the whole chapter.
It's my favorite piece of Hockney lore.
Oh.
David Hockney, the man whose name is synonymous with shimmering azure California water, did not know how to swim when he started painting those iconic pools.
No way.
Yeah. He was painting water purely from observation and imagination, essentially idealizing an experience he hadn't yet participated in.
He was writing love letters to something he hadn't met. Why does that matter philosophically?
It matters because it fundamentally shifts how we interpret the paintings. They are not snapshots of realism, they are constructions of desire. They show that the reality of the experience is irrelevant to capturing its idealized essence. The pool becomes a symbol of leisure, wealth, and escape, and Hockney captured that idea of chlorinated paradise better than anyone who was actually in the water. He learned to swim later, of course, but that early work is a profound commentary on projection and imagination.
And the move to California triggered a radical, radiant shift in his technique.
Absolutely. His palette brightened dramatically. The compositions became simpler, more focused. Crucially, the shadows became those crisp architectural slabs we talked about. He starts flattening space, not because he didn't know how to render three dimensions traditionally, but because he understood perspective too well and chose to break it to make the world feel more immediate and vivid. A true record of light, not depth.
That decision to flatten space and meticulously arrange his subjects leads us to a core visual approach: staged naturalism.
Staged naturalism is the key design principle he develops here. It means the arrangement in his paintings feels relaxed, like a spontaneous snapshot of a luxurious afternoon, but it is meticulously constructed and controlled.
It's like the aesthetic of an Instagram perfect home that looks effortlessly clean but secretly hides closet chaos.
Exactly. The idea of casual perfection. His pool paintings, his portraits of couples in minimalist interiors, they are curated realities built from studies of geometry, light, and perfectly positioned figures.
He absorbed the unique paradox of the LA environment so thoroughly.
Yes, Los Angeles felt like this beautiful, confusing stage set. And this is why we see the idea of cinematic stillness creeping into his work. Hockney noticed that people in California didn't just lounge, they posed. The environment, the horizontal views, the framed pools, the perfectly placed mid-century modern furniture all made everyone look perpetually staged.
It captures that essential paradox of California culture. Everyone is striving for an air of complete, effortless casualness, but everything is meticulously arranged for the camera or the eye.
Exactly. And this connects directly to a key design knowledge point: flat depth. This concept is tied directly to mid-century LA architecture, like the work of the Eameses and Richard Neutra. Strong horizontal planes, large sheets of glass, and, crucially, harsh direct sunlight create a spatial condition where surfaces look deep yet appear flat.
Okay, explain how the light does that.
In a humid climate like London, light is scattered and diffused by the atmosphere, which softens shadows and creates gentle tonal shifts that naturally suggest depth and roundness. In dry, clear California, the light is harsh and direct. The shadow lines are razor sharp. When a shadow is that stark, it reads almost like a dark architectural slab on the surface, rather than a void in space. Hockney translates this by making his shadows razor sharp and his surfaces simplified, freezing the exact moment where natural light becomes artificial looking, resulting in flat depth.
So he's painting not just what he sees, but he's translating the geometry and the feeling of that aggressive, high-contrast light.
And that's where he leans on the permission given to him by Matisse's color logic. He could push color into unnatural territory for emotional calibration. The Californian light in his paintings is felt rather than being optically correct. Shadows become lavender, sharp blue, or sometimes even pink instead of the traditional soft gray or brown. He's using color as sensation.
And this is where the influence of photography comes in, but again, in a really subversive way. He wasn't interested in making a painting look like a perfect photograph.
Not at all. He wasn't chasing glossy hyperrealism. He was interested in the slightly awkward, cheap snapshots that distorted perspective. Think of a slightly warped interior shot taken with an old, inexpensive lens. Hockney studied these optical mistakes, how cheap lenses warped figures near the edges, or how shadows looked artificially compressed, like a detective looking at fingerprints. He saw a deeper, more relatable truth in the imperfections and refused to correct them with traditional academic painting techniques.
So the resulting figures in his work are these contemplative, grounded presences. They're sitting, reading, or waiting. There's this sense of immense stillness.
They are quiet, almost stoic participants in the environment, deeply integrated into the landscape's geometry. The air is often still, almost too still, like a long, meditative pause. And speaking of contemplation, we have that strange, delightful fact that links his hyper-modern California environment back to his classical English roots.
Ah, the stained glass windows.
Yes, Hockney once admitted he could stare at pool reflections for hours because the abstract, flickering patterns they created reminded him of the complex geometry and fractured light of the stained glass windows from churches back home.
That's amazing.
It's the ultimate Hockney synthesis, finding luminosity and sacred geometry in the most profane, chlorinated suburban material. It speaks to his ability to find profound connections between wildly different worlds.
And that ability leads directly to his obsession with freezing motion, the unmoving splash.
The most famous example, A Bigger Splash from 1967, is deceptively simple. The painting is entirely static: the pool, the diving board, the modernist apartment building. Yet the splash itself, captured at the apex of its disruption, suggests immense immediate movement. Viewers consistently swear they can hear the water hitting the surface.
It's an illusion that captures time without depicting time passing.
Exactly.
Hmm.
This pursuit capturing motion so precisely that it achieves a unique stillness became a lifelong quest, leading eventually to his multi-paneled collages. This complexity ensures that, despite the surface accessibility, his work fuels relentless thematic debates. Critics are still arguing. Is this simply modernist geometry? Is it pop-adjacent illustration? Is it proto-postmodern because it questions representation?
And you hear that critical debate polarized. Some see it as the re-enchantment of domestic space, finding wonder in the mundane, while others call it sunlit existentialism, where the stillness hints at deeper emotional distance. And then, of course, the purists who just dismiss it as too pretty.
That phrase, too pretty, is usually a critical shortcut deployed when a work of art is visually compelling, but doesn't fit into the established, serious, academic categories of angst or tragedy. What they miss is the sophisticated visual encoding. His work achieves a kind of quiet, sophisticated commentary, particularly regarding queer visibility, achieved not through overt statement, but through the framing, the geometry, and the subtle, tender interactions between his figures. The fact that these debates persist confirms the depth beneath the surface simplicity.
So as the California vision solidifies, Hockney starts pulling the thread, connecting drawing, photography, and the logic of pop art into a title bundle. It's time for him to break the frame entirely.
This is where he stops being merely a talented figurative painter and becomes a true conceptual leader. He enters the pop art conversation, but always sideways, like sneaking into a movie theater through the back door.
Let's contrast him with the giants of the movement to understand his specific contribution. If we view Andy Warhol as the king of cool, detached repetition, and Roy Lichtenstein as the master of comic book irony, taking a lowbrow source and intellectualizing it, where does Hockney fit?
Hockney is the architect of warm precision. He takes the graphic clarity of pop, but he infuses it with observational devotion. He's looking at the world with genuine affection, even when he's using graphic outline and simplified color. He rejects the emotional coolness of Warhol. His paintings feel lived in, warm, and personal, even when they are geometrically structured.
The power of his line is what makes this warm precision work so well. It's drawn with the confidence of a cartoonist, but the surfaces are painted with the texture and patience of a traditional stage designer.
The lines are incredibly important. They guide the viewer almost like a camera's tracking shot around the composition. They aren't boundaries that flatten the image, they are invitations to follow the form. This reliance on the drawn line connects to a crucial design knowledge point: edge hierarchy.
Okay, edge hierarchy. Explain that and how it functions outside of painting.
Edge hierarchy is a principle common in graphic design, animation, and particularly UI/UX design, but it's rarely analyzed in fine art. The principle dictates that strong, defined lines emphasize shape, bringing an object forward and suggesting graphic clarity. Weaker lines, or edges defined only by subtle color shifts, suggest depth and recede. Think about a modern app icon. The key shapes have strong outlines for immediate recognition, while the background elements rely on softer gradients. This structural intelligence allows Hockney's work to be simultaneously stylized and realistic, flat yet dimensional. You are looking at real life through a sophisticated graphic filter.
That makes his style feel so immediate and accessible. But the real boundary breaking starts with how he uses the camera, treating it not as a recorder of truth, but as a co-conspirator for distortion.
Exactly. The typical artist uses a camera for accurate reference, correcting distortions. Hockney uses the camera for distortion. He started snapping dozens, sometimes hundreds, of photos of a single scene, a person, a view, and interior, specifically to study how cheap lenses warped interiors, how perspective broke, and how figures elongated near the edges. He studied the photographic mistakes because he found them perceptually more truthful than fixed realism.
And this culminates in his famous photographic works, the joiners, the incredible Polaroid and photo collages.
These are his cinematic mosaics. They look chaotic at first glance, fragments of the same space arranged like puzzle pieces that refuse to perfectly align. But when you step back, they reveal a profound, coherent visual logic. They depict seeing the world the way a person actually experiences it, which is sequential, fragmented, and pieced together by memory.
Right. We don't see the world in a single static frame. We construct it through dozens of rapid, sequential glances.
It's the visual equivalent of describing a complex event out of chronological order but making perfect sense, because you're following the emotional or perceptual thread, not the linear one. The academic debate over whether joiners are photography, painting, or collage continues to rage, which only proves their hybrid importance.
And this is where that incredible quote comes in, the one that sums up his intent so perfectly.
Hockney once famously joked that photography was too true to be good. It was a polite, affectionate critique of an entire medium. He meant that traditional photography captures the surface, the stillness, but not the experience. He wanted the messy, stitched-together perception, the kind of seeing that requires turning your head, moving your body, and adjusting your attention over time. His joiners capture the motion of seeing, the passage of time across the surface, not the stillness of being seen.
His boundary-breaking curiosity didn't stop at collages. He was one of the earliest major artists to embrace digital technology years before it was commonplace in the art world.
He was fascinated with early digital tools, fax machines, color copiers, clunky rudimentary software, treating them as extensions of the hand and mind, not just novelty gadgets. This is where he took pop logic further, by exploring the blurring of authorship between the hand and the machine.
So when he manipulated images using a color copier or an early paint program, he was actively questioning who the creator was.
Yes. Is the final artwork created by the painter, the machine's algorithm, or the hybrid interaction? This drove critics crazy in the 1980s. Many complained the works lacked the human hand or were technologically cold. They completely missed the point that Hockney was literally using his hands to operate the machines, pushing the digital medium past its intended function.
And that early digital audacity paved the way for his much later celebrated iPad works, right? The core appeal was immediacy.
Immediacy was the driving force. It was about painting at the speed of thought, erasing the lag between perception and translation. If you think of traditional oil painting as a slow, deliberate cooking process, layering, drying, waiting, Hockney's digital drawing is the pure espresso shot. Concentrated, quick, fresh, and immediate. It allowed him to capture fleeting light and color observations instantly.
And throughout this entire period, whether with a pencil, a camera, or a digital stylus, his view of perspective remained consistent. He treated it like an unnecessary game.
He fundamentally believes traditional linear perspective lies. He would talk about vanishing points the way people talk about horoscopes, amusing, occasionally relevant, but not the basis of your worldview. He argues that our binocular vision and constant movement defy the fixed monocular viewpoint demanded by Renaissance perspective. He borrows heavily from Cubism, his own joiners, and non-Western traditions like Japanese screens to build a new, flexible grammar of space that bends and reassembles according to the movement of the eye.
So he used lines and technology as tools to liberate space rather than constrain it, which moves us right into the phase where he scientifically interrogates the very act of vision itself.
This is perhaps the most intellectually rigorous period of his life. He shifts his focus from what he sees to how he sees it, becoming almost a perceptual scientist. He treats traditional linear perspective not as a rigid law, but as an overly strict historical suggestion, deserving friendly interrogation.
That distinction between looking and perceiving is crucial here.
It is. Looking is passive, it's receiving light. Perceiving, for Hockney, is active vision. It's the constant selection, interpretation, memory blending, and adjustment that the brain performs thousands of times a minute. While other painters might accept perspective as an annoying but necessary traffic rule, Hockney treats it like a philosophical puzzle that needs to be broken apart.
And he didn't just look at his contemporaries or even modern masters for answers. He started a deep historical reference study of non-Western and pre-Renaissance art.
He recognized that many cultures had solved the problem of depicting space without resorting to a single fixed vanishing point. He meticulously studied Chinese scrolls, which unfold horizontally like a walk through time, allowing the viewer to progress through the scene sequentially, offering a temporal element. He looked at medieval manuscripts, where scale often obeys religious or narrative hierarchy, not physics. And crucially, he studied Japanese folding screens, fascinated by how they achieve immense scale and narrative depth while still flattening the space. A hallway doesn't narrow. Everything remains boldly present and accessible.
This absorption of these nonlinear visual strategies informs his new technique, which we're calling simultaneous perspective.
That's our core design knowledge point here. Simultaneous perspective is a visual strategy where the artist allows the viewer to see multiple angles at once, the front of the table, the side of a wall, and a view from slightly above without committing to a single viewpoint. For a modern analogy, think about architectural axonometric drawings, or even how modern video game maps present a vast navigable world without forcing the rigidity of a single camera angle.
So if traditional perspective is like looking down a fixed tunnel, Hockney's simultaneous perspective is more like walking around inside the image.
Precisely. Hockney insisted that one-point perspective creates tunnel vision that doesn't match how our bodies move and how our attention bounces. Your brain doesn't scale objects like a perfect 3D graphics engine. When you stand in a room, your attention bounces. A bright kettle glint on the counter can be more visually significant than the entire back wall. Hockney seeks to paint that dance of attention, not the frozen diagram geometry of Euclidean space. He wants the paintings to feel truly lived in.
And this relentless pursuit of how we actually see led him to one of the most intellectually explosive areas of art historical research in the last 25 years, the optical devices controversy.
This was the art historical equivalent of whispering, hey, what if the Renaissance masters were cheating? Hockney's theory, articulated most fully in his book Secret Knowledge, questioned whether Renaissance masters, from Jan van Eyck onward, used optical devices like lenses, mirrors, or the camera obscura to achieve their sudden, unprecedented level of hyper-realistic detail and flawless perspective, particularly after 1420.
This was not a friendly question for the art establishment, who hold the Renaissance masters up as these geniuses of pure, perfect hand-eye coordination.
It challenged the very foundation of Western art, suggesting that technological aids, rather than solely genius, were responsible for this dramatic shift in realism. Hockney approached this with the earnestness of a hobby detective, collaborating with physicist Charles Falco. He created detailed diagrams, tested mirrors, reproduced famous paintings using simple optical tricks, and compared shadow shapes in historical works to known distortions produced by early lenses.
What specifically were they looking for in the paintings?
They looked for things like sudden changes in the scale of objects within the same composition, or specific distortions in cast shadows that seemed consistent with projection rather than freehand drawing. They argued that the ability to render fabric folds and complex metallic reflections jumped dramatically around the early 15th century, suggesting the use of a tool to project the image onto the canvas, which the artist would then trace or paint over. The resistance from traditional art historians was fierce, of course, because it questioned the narrative of pure human genius.
And during this intensive research phase, he was carrying reflective tools around, wasn't he?
He was. It's a quirky small fact that underscores his philosophical point. He was so engrossed in lenses and mirrors that friends joked he was one misstep away from pulling a rabbit out of a camera obscura at a dinner party. But this intense engagement reinforced his core philosophy. Seeing is not passive reception. It is an active, choice-filled, and technologically constructed process.
And how did this new, detailed understanding of space and optics manifest in his own painting style?
His paintings evolved radically again. Interiors stretch open like accordion folds, welcoming the viewer into the space rather than pushing them away to a vanishing point. Tables turn simultaneously toward and away from the viewer. Walls exist at multiple angles at once, like how memory might reorganize a room. Crucially, objects are allowed to declare their own orientation, defying the fixed rules of physics. Chairs face outward, even when their corners should be collapsing into traditional perspective, because they are important objects of attention.
So he moved toward an experiential realism, mapping attention and memory rather than geometry.
Exactly. His reams become maps of attention. And this is evident in his massive return to the landscape of his childhood, the monumental paintings of the Yorkshire fields.
These huge, multi-panel paintings of the English countryside are a perfect culmination of his ideas about simultaneous perspective.
They are enormous, often composed of dozens of separate panels, each painted from a slightly different viewpoint or at a different time of day. The combined image creates a sweeping environment that simply refuses to be flattened into a postcard view. The work forces the viewer's eye to move, to construct the scene sequentially. It's immersive before that word became a marketing buzzword.
And this leverages the design knowledge point of sequential composition.
Sequential composition is a layout technique common in graphic novels, cinema, and architectural walkthroughs, where multiple views or moments coexist in one frame. For Hockney, it's about perceptual coordination, space, and reality experienced over time, not instantaneously. You must move your body and your eye to assemble the scene.
And light in these pieces is no longer just about physics.
No. Light becomes a narrative element, a kind of emotional punctuation. A specific corner of a field glows with an intense orange because in that moment it mattered to the artist's attention. A pathway brightens because the eye is meant to land there. It is experiential realism, not photographic realism. It records how the light felt and where the eye danced.
So if we synthesize this entire section, Hockney's central lifelong thesis about vision is that it is not passive.
His thesis is that vision isn't a recording device. It's an active, collaborative blend of selection, interpretation, memory, and attention. His art doesn't just depict space, it performs space for the viewer, forcing you to participate in its creation. This commitment to active vision and the techniques he pioneered to achieve it is precisely what allowed his influence to leak far beyond the museum walls.
This is where we move into the quiet but powerful influence of Hockney on the core aesthetics of contemporary culture. He became the painter whose visual sensibility just seeps into everything from high fashion to app icon design.
It truly is a design virus, infecting everything with unapologetic brightness and clarity. Designers secretly adore him because they borrow his dissolving edges, his candy-bright surfaces, and that insistence that shadows should be lavender or sharp blue instead of obediently gray. His visual vocabulary became a shorthand toolkit for signaling both retro optimism and fresh modern design.
And this isn't random aesthetic borrowing, it's rooted in specific color theory that he mastered.
Absolutely. The foundational design knowledge point here is high chroma triadic harmony. It's a technique that balances three evenly spaced hues on the color wheel, like the pairing of a bright cyan, a saturated magenta, and a high-key yellow-orange.
That sounds aggressive. How does he keep it from clashing violently?
He uses high chroma, meaning the colors are pure and intense, but he keeps them in balance, like a well-tuned jazz trio. Each part is distinct, but none overpowers the others. The effect is joy without chaos. Modern tech companies and product lines echoing his bright, gently clashing hues are directly using this principle because they realize Hockney insisted color should feel alive, vivid, and emotionally calibrated, not muted or obedient. It sells optimism.
But just when we assume his influence is confined to palettes, we find that designers borrowed his structural ideas, particularly in the digital realm.
This is one of the most fascinating secrets of modern design. Some UX designers have actually confessed that Hockney's early digital brushwork, his clunky, textured drawings from early paint programs and later the iPad, were early references for skeuomorphic interface textures.
Skeuomorphism being those pre-flat design icons that tried to look like real-world objects.
Exactly. The glothy, slightly textured icons that suggested depth and a real-world feel. Hockney's digital drawings provided an aesthetic reference point, proving that screens didn't have to flatten all emotion or texture. He showed that you could use digital tools to suggest a tactile, emotional surface.
And beyond texture, Silicon Valley product designers openly copied his modular visual thinking.
Think back to his 1980s photo collages. The joiners, breaking scenes into multiple frames and reassembling them to capture motion. Today's multi-window interfaces, tiled photo review loops, endless dashboards full of compartmentalized information.
Tech calls that information architecture or multitasking display.
And art history calls it multi-perspective composition, or sequential composition. Hockney realized that modern attention is fragmented and requires a flexible visual grammar. His technique is now baked into how we process information on a screen. While the intent might differ, Hockney's was emotional, text is functional. The visual solution is parallel, breaking the scene down into manageable, reassemblable chunks.
It's remarkable how his art transitioned from canvas geometry to interface logic, and this modular, clean, yet vibrant aesthetic leaked into fashion as well, creating what we can describe as wearable optimism.
Fashion designers love him for his clean outlines and simple emotional geometry. They translate his confident lines into stitching patterns, eyewear silhouettes, and handbag contouring. For example, his distinct rectangular glasses have become an eyewear classic, lending an immediate intellectual but approachable vibe. Buyers often have no idea they are wearing a painter's worldview. They just know the item feels refreshing, sunny, or smart. He sells the mood of a place sunlit LA without needing the place itself.
And this extends powerfully to interior design, specifically in how designers use his technique of spatial flattening.
Precisely. They borrow his use of layered planes of color to reshape room proportions, often using pastel gradient walls or high-contrast color blocking. Interior architects have even cited his work for creating experiential color pathways, which refers to using specific, Hockney-esque, vibrant colors to direct movement, focus attention, or change the mood entirely as you transition through a space. It's an immersive, color-based architectural language.
And we absolutely must give time to the quirky fact that proves his influence threshold was exceeded and reached deep into consumer culture: the denim wash.
Yes, the legendary, rumored Hockney wash. A major denim brand seriously floated the idea of a specific colorway, a deep, shimmering cyan wash meant explicitly to mimic the reflective, bright edges of the water in his pool paintings. They were trying to bottle the essence of the Californian aesthetic and sell it as a pair of jeans.
Did it ever launch?
It didn't, thankfully, because it would have been tragically overpriced.
Hmm?
But the fact that a denim boardroom seriously flirted with bright, sunlit fantasy proves that his visual footprint is everywhere. His style is no longer just a category, it's an attitude.
It's the attitude that the world is inherently worthy of looking at, even on a Tuesday morning.
That's it. He led a slow revolt against the beige and gray monochrome minimalism that dominated architecture and design for decades. The cultural pendulum swung toward joy and vibrancy, and David Hockney provided the definitive color palette for that swing.
So we've traced the incredible journey. From the rebellious student arguing with professors in Yorkshire over the word queer to the master of perceptual coordination, a man whose work constantly insists that vision is active, constructive, and participatory.
His influence, as we've seen, works by seepage and persistent visual citation, not by force. He's quoted visually on mood boards, runways, and digital interfaces, even when people don't name him. His legacy doesn't sit quietly in museums. It actively informs how we design and experience modern culture. He had the philosophical audacity to treat screens and canvases alike as new surfaces waiting for fingerprints.
And that persistent curiosity about technology and perception brings us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, connecting his lifelong quest to break tradition with our current moment.
Given everything we've discussed, his dedication to simultaneous perspective, his joiners depicting the motion of seeing over time, and his rejection of static vanishing points, consider this. What aspect of our rapidly evolving spatial technologies, like high-resolution VR or augmented reality, would David Hockney likely be attempting to break next? He would never simply accept the virtual rules of fixed camera views or predetermined geometry. He would challenge the fundamental perspective of the digital space to paint the dance of attention, the true, shifting, emotional experience of perception inside the headset. He would find a way to make the virtual world feel more physically present than the real one. That is certainly something worth mulling over.